How does a polite request to stop looking at my bottom ensure innocent smoothies continue to be the apple of so many customers' eyes? How does Uber drive brand loyalty even while encouraging customers not to use their service? How does Starbucks elicit warm, fuzzy feelings even while advertising frappuccinos? In today's video, we're looking at brand archetypes, tone of voice, and visual identity, all while discovering why Brazilians want to be like Italians, and Italians want to be like the English, in tactical footballing terms, of course. This is Zonal Marketing. How are we? Welcome to episode 15 of Zonal Marketing, a marketing mix model which uses the tactical lessons taken from football management to help you to understand, plan and measure your marketing activity effectively. I'm Simon Vincent, the marketing tactician, and in this episode I'll be looking at how identifying and accentuating your company's innate brand identity can affect your tactical approach to marketing, and of course how that can bring you better business results. As always, I'll start with an example from the world of football and then see what we, as marketers and business owners, can learn and apply to our own discipline. So let's dig in. In his seminal book on the evolution of football formations, Inverting the Pyramid, Jonathan Wilson says, "What became apparent in the writing of this book is that every nation came fairly quickly to recognizing its strengths, and that no nation seems to quite trust them. Brazilian football is all about flair and improvisation, but it looks yearningly at the defensive organization of the Italians. Italian football is all about cynicism and tactical intelligence, but it admires and fears the physical courage of the English. English football is about tenacity and energy, but it feels it ought to ape the technique of the Brazilians." And in laying this out, right at the very start of his much admired treatise on football tactics, what Wilson is doing is immediately establishing that there is an intrinsic, immovable truth about any team that undeniably exists, however intangibly, and that approach or appearance is difficult, perhaps impossible to change, no matter how hard you might try. It's a jaw-dropping claim for an author who spends much of the rest of the book outlining a myriad of ways in which a multitude of tactical mastermind football managers have shifted, adapted and yes, inverted formations, positions and player roles in an effort to surprise opponents, confound expectations and achieve amazing things. It's a theme that's picked up and expanded upon by Michael Cox in his book Zonal Marketing, in which he methodically works through how specific tactical approaches have permeated club football in Holland, Italy, France, Portugal, Spain, and then Germany and finally England, seeing certain flag-bearing clubs, your Ajaxes, your Barcelonas, your Portos from each country enjoying their moment in the sun through playing to their intrinsic, geographically defined strengths. But identities exist not simply along national borders. Indeed, within countries, within regions, within cities even, clubs, local media and supporters go to great lengths to establish themselves as being the very antithesis of their rivals, using factors such as key moments in their past, key people, political affiliations and even philosophy to explain why you're either with us or against us. To take but one example, the rivalry that exists within the city of Madrid between Atletico and Real is one of the most intense in world football. Since both clubs' foundation in the early 1900s, one, Atletico, has always been seen as the working man's club, while the other, Real, was for the elite. Indeed, the word Real means royal, an epithet bestowed upon the club by the King of Spain no less in 1920. But it goes further. Real has historical links to the renowned right-wing dictator General Franco, while Atletico has had coaches jailed in years gone by, accused of being communists. Real refused to sign non-Caucasian players, including Eusebio, as recently as the 1960s, while Atletico's fans practically revel in their team's Indians nickname. Real's stadium is located in the business and banking area of the city, while Atletico's, until recently, was based next to a brewery and a motorway. And Real's crest bears the coat of arms of Madrid, while Atletico's refers to the wider Castile region of which they're a part. And so you can see that these differences run deep, so deep in fact that it affects the way the two teams play to this day. Even now, Real Madrid are the team of the Galacticos, superstar players on the biggest contracts, a club that once had its transfer policy likened to putting another layer of gold paint on a Bentley that has no engine. The point being that the team is mandated to play with flair, attacking brilliance, high-risk football with the expectation of high and indeed lucrative rewards. Atleti, on the other hand, are coached by the pragmatic Diego Simeone, who takes pride in, above all things, defensive solidity, efficiency, and it's fair to say, some degree of cynicism. He's the perfect fit for that club that's always styled itself as the plucky underdog and played a type of football in keeping with that tack. In short, when you're an owner, manager or player of Atletico Madrid, there are certain expectations that you will uphold a certain style of play, while at Real, the polar opposite approach is practically mandated. But far from these being handicaps, these club identities are a part of what makes the two Madrid teams so compelling. The stories behind them help supporters to pick a side and then passionately follow them through good times and bad. How many of you are listening to me talk about some of the examples I said above and already feeling like a deep-seated affinity to one team or the other, whether or not you previously supported either? Wouldn't you love to inspire that sort of emotion and loyalty in your company's customers? Well, you can, through also developing a brand identity and then living that out in everything you do, everything you say, and in every image, sound, and experience that you create for your tribe. And in the next section, I'm going to tell you how. So the first thing to mention when I talk about brand identity is that I'm not talking about branding. This isn't a piece about how to design a logo, develop a color palette, or come up with a strapline. Those things are all very important, and there are people far better qualified than me to talk about them. But whether or not you already have those things, understanding your brand identity will help you to live your brand values in a way that's far more meaningful and long-lasting than simply putting your logo at the top of a document. When I work with my clients, I typically start by asking them to consider the same things I mentioned in relation to football teams. So you may have heard of the 4 P's of marketing. Well, I have my own version, with the P's being people, place, past, and philosophy. When it comes to people, do you have a Bill Shankly or a George Best or even a Sheikh Mansour, a key figure that has had a disproportionate influence on the direction, values, and expectations of your company? In business, a good example of these would be Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, for example. But they don't have to be the founders. At Apple, it's absolutely fair to say that product designer Johnny Ive has had an inordinate role in that company's success. Looking at place, does the continent, country, region or city that your company was founded in or indeed is based in now, does that affect how you built your product or service? So in France, Le Classique rivals Paris Saint-Germain and Marseille consider themselves to be completely different clubs, based on one being from the capital city in the north and the other being a port city from the south. Likewise, companies like Yorkshire Tea and Rimmel draw heavily on the associations that people have with the more rural, no-nonsense north of England and the cosmopolitan cultural capital London to establish their differentiating proposition. Regarding past, as a startup or scale-up company, many of your competitors, like most football clubs, will have a long, storied history that bind them to a certain approach and a set of expectations. But even when you're trying to disrupt the old dynasties, as Manchester City did when Abu Dhabi United Group took ownership of them, this doesn't mean that you can't use your newfound approach and identity to have as a selling point. So think about Hay Club, whose adverts regularly encourage viewers to mix it up and break the traditional rules of whiskey drinking, playing on their upstart challenger brand status and rendering their comparative lack of heritage irrelevant even in an industry like whiskey where it's so heavily relied upon. Finally, on philosophy. This is an area in which startup and scale-up businesses have an advantage. Many of your competitors will have been started before having a purpose was considered important in commerce. In the past, running a business was a formula, and if that formula involved transporting goods over long distances, taking advantage of cheap labour and foreign lands, or simply harvesting unsustainable resources as part of the product and/or packaging, so be it. But as a startup or scale-up business, you have an opportunity to build a reputation and identity around such things as being ethical, sustainable, or collaborative. A comparative approach in football might be the Red Bull footballing franchise, which, until recently, was largely under the strategic guidance of Ralf Rangnick, and focuses on recruiting raw, young talent and developing them in line with the franchise's overall approach. Ultimately, it's a model that's been responsible for kickstarting the careers of players such as Erling Haaland, Timo Werner, Joshua Kimmich, and Sadio Mane. So now that you've identified the most formative parts of your company, I do 4 things with the brands I work with. We look at archetypes, brand pillars, tone of voice, and visual identity. Archetypes adopts the work of psychoanalyst Carl Jung. In 1919, he developed 12 personality types. These include things like the outlaw, the innocent, and the caregiver, and posited that each of us has one dominant archetype in our own individual personality. But successful brands also exhibit one dominant personality type in their marketing. So think about how Harley-Davidson embodies the outlaw in all of their marketing, and how that encourages a certain kind of person to not only buy their bikes, but actually to have the company's logo tattooed on their body. Think about how Innocent, perhaps unsurprisingly, embodies the innocent in everything from their social media posts to their packaging to their Big Knit for Age UK campaign. Another example might be Dove, who foster the archetype of the caregiver, gently, kindly supporting women to understand and enjoy their real beauty. And now consider the loyalty and the emotion that sort of campaign generates in customers, like loyalty for a bar of soap. So once you've identified your brand archetype, you can start to build out a small core list. I always like to keep it to 3 or 4 of brand values, and these arise fairly easily from the archetype analysis. Finally, in order to bring this all to life, you have to have like a tangible end product of all this navel gazing. You need to look at tone of voice and visual identity. Based on your archetype and brand values, ask yourself questions like, how funny should we be? How formal? How emotive? How assertive? So because innocent embody the innocent archetype, they communicate that through a cheeky, playful tone of voice. My favourite example of this is the request on the base of each of their products to, quote, stop looking at my bottom. Because Uber embodies the archetype of the hero, their advertising is highly principled, very assertive, but unlike an outlaw brand like a Brewdog, for example, they keep it relatively formal. So my favourite example of this was when they posted a billboard in 2020 saying, if you tolerate racism, delete Uber. Black people have the right to move without fear. And of course, all of this bleeds into the visual identity. So how do you want your company to look in all of the imagery, video, and physical assets that you put out? So because Starbucks is the lover archetype, everything they do is designed to delight the senses, from the seating, lighting, and music in their coffee shops to the language they use in their ads. So an example of this might be that first sip feeling, to, yes, the sensual, soft graphic design and photography that features on their Instagram feed. But all of these examples are just single executions, one-off activations that involve a single channel and a piece of content. Where this gets really powerful is when it forms part of an overall tactical approach, using each channel or content strengths to communicate to people in the right way, at the right time, and that is what I'll look at in the final section of today's episode. So how does this impact the tactical approach of these brands in their marketing? Well, I used Starbucks in my last example for a good reason. In episode 9, I did a deeper dive on Starbucks as an example of tiki-taka marketing. Boiled down, I discussed how this soft, sensual approach to the design of their shops, their their main conversion point, is designed to put the customer at ease, to make them feel like they aren't being sold to pull them into the brand in a similar way to how Lionel Messi played a deep false nine role in Pep Guardiola's Barcelona side as a means of pulling opposition defenders out of position. Facilitating this, Guardiola instructed his midfield and his defenders to have a narrow, possession-retaining approach, and this I liken to Starbucks concentrating on a good deal of their advertising on the narrow, customer-demanded channels, and creating lots of relatively simple, lifestyle-focused content that keeps the attention but rarely challenges or provokes customers in a way that a long ball, a branded piece of content might do. However, if your company is not a lover, this type of approach might not work. So if your brand is a ruler archetype, for example, as many luxury brands, Rolex, etc. are, a better tactical approach would be gegenpressing marketing, in which you play up, you use the high price point and the exclusive nature of the product to employ channels and content that communicate scarcity and social proof. And I cover gegenpressing in more detail in episode 11 of this series. If I've lost any of you here, that's okay. Feel free to go back through previous episodes in the series. I recommend starting at the beginning and going through chronologically to be brought up to speed. But alternatively, you can ask me to come and talk through these ideas with you and your team on an individual basis. I'm available for speaking gigs, training sessions and client work. And if you'd like me to talk about any of that, you can do so by visiting x-cmo.com. That's all for now, but check back here every week for a new episode, each one explaining another part of my tactical approach to marketing through a footballing lens. Next time, I'll be helping you to identify opportunities and threats to your business and explaining how you factor them into your marketing mix. I'll be using examples from the likes of Dollar Shave Club, Oreo and Airbnb in a marketing sense. And I'll also be running through why some football managers, looking at you, Jose Mourinho, sometimes decide to park the bus. As always, if you're enjoying this series, please do like, comment and share. It really helps the channel, and if it helps the channel, I'm hoping it will help more people just like you. And until next time, thank you very much for your attention.